You're listening to episode 63, Krystal's story, a son with neonatal pneumothorax in the NICU. Hi, and welcome to the Child Life On Call podcast. When your child is sick, the whole world seems to stop in its tracks. Plans and priorities change, and your number one job becomes figuring out how to get your child well again. For some of us, rest, medications, and relaxation can do the trick. But for others, it takes more. It takes countless doctor appointments, invasive medical testing, therapy, surgeries, the list goes on, and then you still may not have all of the answers or results you were hoping for. This podcast features parents of children that have an illness or medical condition and gives them a place to share their own journeys and experiences. We will talk about the ups and the downs, the highs and the lows, but one thing seems to remain the same. Children are resilient and teach us more about ourselves and the world than we could ever imagine. Thank you so much for lending a listening ear and opening up your heart to these families and this podcast. I'm your host, Katie Taylor.
And so every step of the way, they're telling us this works for most babies, this works for most babies, and it just keeps not working for our baby.
Hello, my friends. I am so happy that you are here today to get to hear from this amazing mom, Krystal, who is one of those people who I just talked with and instantly connected with. And we ended up having such an incredible conversation about how NICU moms really feel about going to the NICU and that it's definitely not talked about enough. So I am so excited that you're going to be able to listen. Some of the ideas she had, some of the feelings that she had, some of the ways she coped through going through her experience, and she's just so awesome. But you guys know I am so happy that you are here. I love when you share this podcast with other coworkers or parents that you serve in the NICU or friends who don't totally get what your medical journey has been like as a parent. So just keep sharing, keep rating and reviewing, because it just makes it so much easier for other parents to be able to find us. I love when y'all comment and engage on social media. You can find us at Child Life On Call, and we are just trying our best to give you, parents, caregivers, professionals, content that you can use to make the lives of parents and children facing any kind of medical issue or life challenges just a little bit easier. So I'm so glad you're here today, and let's get started with Krystal's conversation.
Krystal, I am married to my college sweetheart. We met in college. We were both in the School of Social Work. We graduated together. We've been married for 8 years now. We have two girls and a son, and our oldest daughter is 6. She's in first grade, and so she's really dealing with all of this remote schooling, and she's finally back at school. So that's really exciting. And
that's a relief.
We have, oh yes, she has been loving going back to school, even with all of the changes and the masks and the social distancing, staying apart. Even with all of that, she tells me all the time, I'm so happy to be back in school. So that is really exciting. And we have a 2-year-old, and our son is 9 months.
Okay, gotcha. And y'all are in Florida, correct?
Yes, we live in South Florida, about 15 minutes from the beach. It's about 80 degrees today.
Oh, so dreamy. So dreamy.
Yes, it is. It is. We love living here. We both grew up here, about 20 minutes from each other, but we met in college, which was 3.5 hours away. So that's pretty funny that my husband and I to grow up so close together, but then not meet until we moved away from home.
Yeah.
But now we're back.
It sounds like it was meant to be then.
Yes. We've kind of like gone through days in our lives where we were potentially like in the same room together, but never met.
That's so crazy.
It's pretty crazy how often like we crossed paths, but didn't meet until college.
It is. That is so strange how that can happen. My husband and I are kind of the same way. So we actually met working in DC together, but happened to be from Texas. but different places in Texas. But when I was living in Plano, which is north of Dallas, he was working in Plano at the same time. So it is weird how that stuff kind of like can connect you. I'm like, did I see you at Jason's Deli? You know?
Right.
So,
so true.
Tell us a little bit about who we're going to be talking about today, and what the beginning of y'all's story is.
Yeah, so we're talking about my son, so my newest baby. Mm-hmm. He's 9 months now. And we started off with having issues right when he was born, but nothing happened before then. And that's kind of, to me, the crazy part of our story. With my first pregnancy, the pregnancy itself was horrible. It was like everything that could go wrong went wrong. And I was so anxious the whole time because so many things were going wrong. But then she came out totally perfect. Mm. And my second pregnancy was like a blissful pregnancy. And that it's her fault that then we were like, I could do this again.
Yes, exactly.
Right. So, and his pregnancy was totally fine. There was no indication that anything was going to be wrong. I had him at 38 weeks. I was scheduled for a C-section at 39 weeks. So he did come a little bit early. My doctor had tried to slow down my contractions once I went into labor at 38 weeks, and nothing was working to slow it down. Like, he was ready to come out. Mm-hmm. So we did go for the C-section and have him, but it was totally uneventful. Everything was fine. And then they wheeled me back to recovery. So it took maybe 20, 30 minutes to stitch me up and get me back into recovery. And I get to recovery, and the nurses start telling me as soon as I'm wheeled back in there that, oh, he's not breathing good. And I'm thinking to myself, what are you talking about? Because right before I went into the C-section, they had done an ultrasound to check his breathing, to see if his lungs were developed, to see his positioning in case we were going to take him for the C-section. And everything was fine literally an hour ago when he was still inside me. And so she's looking at his breathing, and she's saying, no, his stats are low. He's struggling to breathe. Something's not right. And so they took him to the NICU, and when I had the C-section and they take him out, they kind of let you nuzzle on him for a minute. Yeah. And then they took him away, and that was it. Like, once I got back into recovery, I never even got to see him because all the nurses were huddled around him. Yeah. And they just took him. And my husband and I are kind of looking at each other thinking, like, okay, that's weird. I guess they're going to watch him and bring him back.
Right.
And then it just kept being one thing after another. When he got back to the NICU, they found that his lungs had collapsed. And I was thinking, like, I don't even know that that's a thing.
Right.
Like, how do lungs even collapse? You know, when we did the ultrasound, he was breathing on his own, and he's fine. Yeah. And so then they start to give us the next steps. And, well, most babies recover from this on their own, so we're just going to watch him. Then after a couple of hours, it just kept getting worse. So then they said, well, we can give him antibiotics. Most babies, it's treated with antibiotics. So we're going to give him that. And they gave him the antibiotics, and that didn't work either. And then they said, okay, we have to do a little bit more of an invasive procedure. At this point, they had to ventilate him, and they had to put him into a medically induced coma because he couldn't get his breathing under control. And every time he would cry, it would deflate the lungs worse and worse. Oh. And so in just a matter of hours, we go from perfectly fine, we're having a baby a week before we expected to now his lungs collapsed, he's on a ventilator, and they are talking about they have to put a needle into his chest and manually push air into his lungs to try and reinflate it. And so we get the same the same narrative that, well, this works for most babies. It's really, really rare that this doesn't work, or that babies need the worst case scenario. So we're okay. So they go ahead and do that. It didn't work. And so every step of the way, they're telling us this works for most babies. This works for most babies. And it just keeps not working for our baby.
Mm-hmm.
And it was so scary. They finally had to put a chest tube in his chest, and he had it there for about 2 days. And they were just watching him. That was literally the last thing that they could do. So
Wow.
we're sitting there thinking, like, this is either going to work or I'm not bringing my baby home. And it was terrifying, just sitting and waiting to see if this chest tube was going to work. And finally, after 2 days, they said it worked. He looks good. And it was such a relief that it was still a long road from there, but at least it worked, and his lungs were reinflated at that point. So that at that point, it was like, okay, we still have a journey, but he's alive.
It's just, it's like you said, it's like that moment where everything is fine, and then all of a sudden nothing is fine, right? You go from being literally elated and excited to the most scared you've ever been in your life. And there's no in between. And then, kind of setting the stage, this was right at the beginning of COVID. And, the normal support team that you usually get to have with you when you go through something hard doesn't get to be with you. And I'm just so glad that your husband was there, at that time to be able to walk through it with you. And you just had a C-section. Like, that's the other thing, is like your body and your brain are physically recovering from basically being hit by a truck.
Right, exactly. And you're so right, because I had a lot of friends who would say to me, oh, my baby was in the NICU too, and my baby was in the NICU too. And I'm like, yeah, a lot of babies go to the NICU, and most of them end up being totally fine. But being in the NICU in COVID was so hard. And even so, like I said, I went into labor on my own a week before my scheduled C-section. So when I got to the hospital, they actually wouldn't let my husband in. So they said that my husband can't come in until I go for a C-section. Wow. Because they knew that I was going to go, eventually either I was going to go home or I was going to have the C-section. So then that's when he could come in. So this whole time at the beginning where they were trying to stop the contractions and trying to, get my labor under control, I was alone in the hospital with nobody. And my husband, the hospital was an hour away, so my husband wasn't going to go home. He was waiting in the car for 12 hours. 12 hours in the car, just waiting to see, like, am I going to have a baby today, or are we going to go home? And so they don't let anybody in there. Then your baby's in the NICU, and my husband, poor thing, I know we often talk about the stress of the mom, and, because I was the one that went through the C-section, I was the one that just delivered the baby, and it's very much expected that the husband kind of holds it together. And he did, but the poor man was running down the hallways back and forth because we couldn't have any visitors in the hospital. And so he always was under the stress that somebody was alone. Yeah. If he was in the NICU, then I was alone. Right. And if he was with me, then the baby was alone. And so he's literally running down the hallway trying to be with both of us at the same time, and it just wasn't possible. And when I had my other two, you could have visitors. Like my parents came, his parents came, my siblings came, and so he could go and kind of take a shower at home while my mom was with me, and I was never alone. But now, being on COVID, there was nobody that could be there. And so he's in the NICU trying to find out what's going on with the baby, what's happening, trying to just be with him. And I'm sitting there alone wondering what's going on, what's happening. And then once I was discharged, so then we were out of the hospital, then you could only have one parent visit per day. So then we couldn't even be in the NICU together. And that's something that every single person that tried to reach out, which I appreciated everybody's, support and reaching out to me, but you all had your husbands there, and you had your parents there, and you had your support people there, and I had nobody.
Yeah.
And I couldn't hold him. I wasn't allowed to hold him. I wasn't allowed to touch him. I wasn't allowed to talk to him, because if he cried, then that could deflate his lungs more. So I wasn't allowed to do anything except sit there by myself.
Yeah.
And it was so hard. And you couldn't even take shifts to see him. It was one parent per day. So if I went one day, that meant my husband couldn't see him for that day at all. And if he went a day, then that meant I was going a whole entire day without seeing my child. And it's just not something that anybody expects. Like, even when if it wasn't COVID, if there wasn't a pandemic and your baby goes to the NICU, typically you can go see them day or night when you want to. And it's hard, but at least you can be there. And it was just so hard to just not even be allowed to be there, and to not have my husband and not have any support. And you're in this state of, like, am I asking all the right questions? Am I understanding everything? The doctors use this language that sometimes you don't understand,
Mm-hmm.
and there's not another person there to talk that through with and make sure, okay, I'm an anxious mess. So did I get all my questions out? Did I remember all my questions? And there's just nobody there with you.
There is so much there I want to talk about. But that point you just made about, like, not understanding what the doctors are saying to you, the care team is saying to you, for them, it's so typical for them, these things that they see. And for a parent, it's like literally life or death. Like, which way is this going?
Mm-hmm.
So it's just, there's a disconnect there. And it can be so difficult to, and a lot of times, like, parents tell me they ask the question and then they don't really even hear the answer, because they're so anxious about the next question that they wanted to get to. And then it's like you have to go back and revisit it all. And it's a really hard time to navigate, especially during a pandemic when you're there alone.
Right. It is. And it's interesting because, so the medical term for what he had is a pneumothorax, and they kept calling it a pneumo. And I thought they were telling me that he had pneumonia.
Yeah.
And so this whole time I was like, oh, he has pneumonia. And he didn't. And so then, not funny, but ironically, I should say, on about day 5, he did get pneumonia.
Wow.
And so then they started telling me that he had pneumonia. And I was like, I said to the doctor, yeah, you told me that already. Because this whole time I thought that they were saying that he had pneumonia when they were saying pneumo.
Right.
And then she's like, no, he has pneumonia on top of the pneumo. And I'm like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
And so then I thought that he had pneumonia, and then he didn't, but then he did.
Yeah.
And it was just so crazy. And here I am telling my husband, because he's not there, that our baby has pneumonia, and then he didn't, but now he does.
Oh my gosh.
It's so confusing.
And it's not that any of this gets easier, but were there things that some of the care team did while either, you were going in those 12 hours by yourself before your husband got there, or while you were in and out of the NICU, that really kind of helped alleviate some anxiety or some questions. So, like what I'm thinking of is my NICU, we do a little tuck-in call. We call the parents every single night before bedtime. It's just like this tiny little tuck-in reminder. You can answer the phone. You don't have to. We can leave a message. But, for some parents, it's just like that last thing of the day. I know how my baby's doing, and these are our goals for the night. When I wake up, this is what's happening. Were there any things, especially because, in the pandemic, these things mean the most when you were there by yourself, that the care team did that helped?
There were things that helped, but I have a friend that is a charge nurse at another NICU, and so I kept like checking in with her, and it made me realize that I wish that there had been a little bit more of that, because no, we didn't get like a tuck-in call. They didn't ever call us unless we called them. And the hospital that my friend works at, they have cameras. And so they do like camera time. Not all the time. They don't have the cameras on all the time, but every day from like this time to this time, they turn the cameras on and you can go watch on an app on your phone. And we didn't really have any of that. Like there wasn't child life. There wasn't a social worker there. And my husband and I are both social workers. And I thought that we would be linked with somebody or something to help us. And we didn't ever get that. And the nurses were really, really great. They had a whiteboard behind his bassinet, and they would decorate it, and they would write notes to him. They let me bring pictures in, and my older daughter's colored pictures, and we brought them in and put them by his bassinet. And so they were really, really great. Even when I was there and I couldn't hold him, the charge nurse would come and sit next to me, and like we would just talk, because everyone else in the NICU was there holding their babies and doing skin to skin, and I'm just sitting there doing nothing.
Yeah.
And so she would come and talk to me, and I developed a good relationship with her. So that was great. Just the relationship was really, really great. But I really wish that we did have some of those other things that would have made the stay just a little bit easier.
And even just, for other parents, NICU parents who are going through this right now in the pandemic, because it still holds true in a lot of hospitals, one parent in, one parent out. These are the questions you can ask for, because you don't even know to ask for like a tuck-in call. You don't even know to ask like, oh, I didn't know, am I allowed to FaceTime? Like, do you have a FaceTime iPad? Like, unless, nurses have such an important job, literally administering medication and keeping babies breathing, and they often have more than one baby. But that's when, being the advocate for yourself and for your baby. But if you don't even know the questions to ask, how do you ask them?
Right, exactly. And you're in such a blur that you don't necessarily think about it. And we called every night because I was really committed to breastfeeding. And so I breastfed both of my other two, and I was going to breastfeed him. And so I was pumping around the clock, which also very strange experience. Like I'm so used to, you wake up from a baby crying, not from your alarm going off and then hooking up to the pump. And so that was kind of our routine, was every time I would pump, I would call. And we would see how he was doing. And so they knew every night at 1 a.m. and at 3 a.m. that I was going to call. So that was helpful. And I remember the first night that we were home, and we made that first 1 a.m. call. And my husband asked, when is a good time to call for an update? Like when is a good time for you? When is a good time that we will get some good information? Because sometimes we would call and they would just say, he's doing good. And so he said, when is a good time that we'll actually get like an update from the doctor? And the nurse said, and not out of anything mean or bad or negative at all, just real. And she said the doctor always visits the sickest babies first.
Yeah.
So tomorrow your baby will be seen first. So you could call pretty early.
Oh.
And we were like, oh my gosh, like my baby is the sickest baby in the NICU right now.
Yeah.
And she didn't mean to hurt my feelings. Like I wasn't mad at her or anything like that. It was just real. Like,
right.
You're asking me what time to call. You can call early because he's going to be the first baby seen. But it was like a stab to the heart. Like, wow, my baby is the sickest baby in the NICU. Oh. And I had him at 38 weeks. He was full term. He was the biggest baby of all three we had, which was funny because he was born at 6 pounds, 6 ounces, and he was the biggest one of our three.
Yeah.
So we kept joking he was such a big baby, and like, what do you mean? He's the sickest one in the NICU. He's going to be seen first. Oh. And, so that also kind of became discouraging, that like it was almost scary then to ask questions.
Right.
Because I didn't want to hear that answer. That's not what I wanted to hear.
Oh gosh. Well, so once he was able to breathe on his own and you were finally able to hold him, what was that like? And I guess you didn't get to share that moment with your husband. You had to go through that alone.
Yeah. So my husband actually got to hold him while I was being stitched up before everything happened.
Okay.
So he had that moment to hold him with, no, as if everything was okay. Like he was just a regular baby at that point. I got to hold him for the first time when he was 10 days old. And he still had a bunch of wires and tubes attached to him, but not as many. And he was awake. He wasn't ventilated anymore. And the nurse put him in my arms, and he looked straight in my eyes. Oh. And we weren't allowed to, our phones had to be in plastic bags. So not that anyone has ever done this, but go ahead and put your phone in a plastic bag and try to take a picture. Every single picture that I have is blurry and has like a film over it from this bag. And so the nurse hands him to me, and he looks in my eyes, and he stared at me, and he didn't take his eyes off me. And the nurse said, "Give me my phone. I'm taking it out of the bag." Oh. And she took the phone out of the bag and said, "You're not getting a blurry picture. Like, you need this picture."
Oh, and that makes me cry.
I know. And I look back at that picture, and I have that one non-blurry picture of him, and he is staring right in my eyes. And I was worried that he wasn't really going to remember me or know who I was, because I couldn't hold him and I couldn't be there, and I couldn't touch him or talk to him or any of the things that I would have normally done. But as soon as he was in my arms, he was like, "Hey, Mom."
He's like, "I'm good."
And yeah. And it was funny because they said, "Okay, he's doing really well. We think that you can hold him now." They gave us an update saying that he'd probably be in the NICU for another 2 weeks, practicing feeding, gaining some weight, just learning to breathe on his own. And then they said, but hold him. Holding him, once you get to hold him, it usually makes a big difference. They start to feel a lot better. And we went home on day 13. Wow. So they said it was going to be 2 weeks after that, and it was only 3 days. Mm-hmm. And it was like, from that moment, as soon as I got my hands on him, everything was fine after that. Like, he turned a corner. He looked in my eyes, and I said to him, "Let's get out of here. let's out of this place."
Time to go.
And he did, and he just turned the corner, and he got better, and it was like that was all he needed.
Oh. Would you
And
talk just a little bit about your other daughters at home and kind of navigating? Because I guess you had a 6-year-old at that time who was pretty much
hmm
understanding mom and dad were stressed and couldn't go visit the baby, and how did you
yeah.
kind of handle that?
Mm. Yeah. So the 2-year-old had no clue what was going on. She was kind of confused, but not old enough to ask questions or to really know what she was confused about. But our 6-year-old, she was 4 when our middle child was born. So she very much remembers coming to visit the hospital and coming home, that the baby came home at the same time as us. She remembered that whole process. So then when it was time to do it again, she was very much aware of how different it was, um, because she had this comparison. And we were actually in the hospital on her birthday. So her birthday was 2 days after he was born. And so we were in the hospital still, and I was still admitted when she turned 6. And so we missed her birthday. And so she was aware of, like, you're not here.
Yeah.
We couldn't talk to her. We couldn't, like, we called her, and we FaceTimed her, but we weren't there. And she kept asking me when we FaceTimed, where's the baby? Where's the baby? Why isn't he with you? Because she remembered that when her sister was born, we were all in the same hospital room.
Yeah.
And so she was like, why isn't he in your room with you? Why is this different? And so we tried to tell her very simply that his lungs needed some help with the doctors, and that they had to take him to a different room so that the nurses could watch him. But she's also very, very sensitive. Like, she cries when flowers die.
Mm-hmm.
So we knew that she couldn't really handle what was really going on unless, like, we had to. I mean, thank goodness that we were able to bring him home. But my husband and I had to have a conversation about how are we going to tell her if we don't bring a baby home? Like, how, because she can't handle a flower dying. Like, she's very, very sensitive, and she cries. Like, how do you have that conversation with a 6-year-old? And I mean, thank goodness we didn't have to have that conversation, but we really had to think about the language that we were using and being honest with her, because she's old enough to know something is up, something's not right, this is different. But also we didn't want to scare her.
Right.
So it was very simple language that, and it's tricky because we were stressed and we were running around, and I had a C-section, so I couldn't drive to the hospital by myself, and nobody could drive me because of COVID. So it's not like I could just pick up the phone and ask my friend to drive me.
Yeah.
Fortunately, my brother was home on summer break from college, and I was like, hey, you are now my chauffeur. Like, you're driving me to the hospital. So he would drive me to the hospital, thank goodness. But, I had him to rely on, and we kind of, like, broke our little COVID bubble because we had no choice, with him. And it was just using very simple, he needs some more help on his lungs. They are, trying to fix his lungs. He's okay. But he does need some doctor help, and kind of saying, sometimes you get sick and you need medicine, but you go home and you take your medicine. Well, with new babies, they're so tiny that the doctors have to watch them to make sure that the medicine is working. They can't just go home, with this kind of thing. It's something that needs to stay in the hospital so that the doctors can keep an eye on him. And that the doctors can make changes if they need to. So that was kind of how we approached it with her in in just that he's on this medication and that the doctors need to watch him. We didn't go into him being ventilated or, that he had surgery. She knows now after the fact. He does have a scar from his chest tube surgery. So she's aware of that, and she knows now that he had that when he was in the hospital. But now that he's okay and he's home, she's, more able to process and digest what happened in the hospital.
Definitely. Well, it sounds like you used just the perfect language for her. And, really, I think it is a balance of, my child as an individual. There's no one right way to say something, and there's no one right time to do it. It's kind of this ongoing conversation, knowing she can come ask questions when she needs to, and you'll be honest with her in the best way that you can. And I like the fact that you could do all that during the craziest 13 days of your life is pretty amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. It's kind of like my husband and I kept having these conversations, like, how are we going to do this? How are we going to say this? But then when you're in the moment and you don't really have a choice, you just do. And I will say that it was, every day you get up and you put one foot in front of the other, but it was really, really hard. The first day when I went to go see him, the nurses kept telling me, you got to get up. You got to get up. You have to go see your baby. You have to go see him. And I'm thinking to myself, I just had surgery. Like, stop telling me to get up.
Yeah.
And, stop pushing me, because yes, I want to see my baby, but I don't want to injure myself and then be stuck here longer. And I was hurting. I was in pain, and it was like this pressure of, like, you have to get up and you have to go see your baby. And I wanted to, but I was also kind of scared, and I was hurting, and there's nobody there to validate your feeling. It's all about the baby, which, it is. Your focus shifts to the baby, but no one asks, me, and especially no one asked my husband, how are you feeling? How are you doing? Like, are you still hurting? Are you in pain? And I finally did get up. It took me about 12 hours. I got up and I went to go see him, and I saw him, and I was there for like 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And I told my husband, I can't do it. I can't sit here. And my husband's looking at me like, what do you mean? Like, you're his mother. You need to be here. And, I would see people's NICU stories about how hard it was to go see their baby, but they knew they had to because they were the mom. And I kept thinking to myself, like, I don't know how people do it. Like, I can't sit here. I can't. I'm going to break.
Yeah.
And he's struggling. They couldn't put clothes on him because they had to be able to visually see his breathing and his chest going up and down. So that meant me seeing his chest going up and down, and you could see him struggling.
Yeah.
And you could see him trying to catch his breath, but not ever really catching his breath.
Yeah.
And it was hard, and I didn't want to sit there and watch him struggle. Now, if they had told me I could hold him, then that would be a different story. But that first time that I saw him, I went and I looked at him. I took a couple of pictures in my plastic bag, and I was there for maybe 5 minutes. And I told my husband, I'm sorry, I can't. And I still feel like failure for that moment that I left. And my husband walked me back to my room, and then he just stood in the doorway. And I was like, go back, like, go be with him.
Yeah.
Like, you're being stronger than me right now, and I am so thankful for that, and just go be with him. And he just stood there, and I was like, not saying anything, not leaving.
Yeah.
And I'm like, it's okay, go. And I could see he just didn't know what to do, and he was just staring and just standing there, not moving. And I remembered that, and I just said, like, you are stronger than me right now, and you need to go be with him. And so he finally.
Are you there?
And yes, I'm here.
Oh, sorry, I just lost you for a quick second.
Okay.
So he did eventually go back to the room.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So he did go back to the NICU, but I had to kind of tell him, it's okay. It's okay. And thank you for being the one that can be there. And he did go back to the NICU room in that moment. But I see these blogs and these NICU blogs and these NICU moms telling their story and how they never left their baby's side. And I always think like, wow, I failed in that department because I wasn't strong enough to stay there. And that is something that you can't get back. And it stinks. Like, it totally stinks that I wasn't strong enough to stay in that moment. But I did go back, and every single day, for the 13 days that we were there, I was there every day except for 2 days that my husband went. So in the whole 13 days, my husband only got 2 of them.
Yeah. Well, I'm so grateful that you told this part of your story, because you are not alone. I just did this last week with a mom who had a C-section, who spent less than 5 minutes at the bedside and couldn't come back until the next day for the exact same reasons. And not to mention, you have to go over in a wheelchair. You're in a hospital gown. You have a catheter most likely attached to you. You're sweating. You cannot. It's just you physically. It's hard to get there, and the emotional aspect. It's too much to handle. It just is.
Right.
And so,
right.
People can say you should go, you should do this, you should do that, and no, you shouldn't. I mean, you have to listen to yourself. And I'm telling you, this just happened with a mom last week, and it happens all of the time. And I'm honestly so proud of you, and I don't even know you, but for saying no and going back and only spending 5 minutes, because if you're not able to handle it, you're not able to handle it, and breaking, and that's not a good choice either. So I don't know. I know that you will be hard on yourself looking back at that time, but you are for sure not alone in that reaction. And I think it's incredibly normal for moms, even if you didn't have a C-section, to have those feelings of, well, what do I do here? I can't change his diaper. I can't do the things I'm used to doing. I can't do, like, everything inside of you that says I need to be doing this for my child, you literally cannot do. And that's hard.
Right.
That's hard
exactly.
to face.
Right. It totally is. And, people, I very rarely have heard another mom admit, like, I felt like a failure in that moment. And so then when you're feeling that way, you feel like you're the only person, and you feel there's all of this, like, super mom, and wow, you're a super mom. And, NICU, we call them NICU warriors. And, everyone is just constantly has that, like, wow, I have to be a super mom. And I have a full-time career. I have 3 kids. I'm publishing a children's book right now. I do a lot. And people will say to me often, wow, you do it all. Like, you have the career and you have the family. And, how do you fit in time to be writing a book too? And, so people will say that. And so then you're like, wow, thank you. Like, I appreciate that. But then it also comes with this pressure of, like, if I don't do something right, they're going to notice that too.
Right.
And if I admit that I didn't stay in the NICU, what are people going to think? Like, people are telling me what, wow, I do it all, and I'm a rock star, and that feels really good. But what are they going to say if they find out that really I had this moment of failure? It's tough to admit it.
I'm just going to tell you, I think that you are a rock star and supermom because you didn't stay, to be honest, like, because you didn't, you listened to yourself and what you could handle. Well, truly, that takes courage, that is what took courage, is going back and saying, you know what, you go, I can't right now. That is courageous to me. It literally gives me chill bumps, because I've never thought about how important it is to talk about those hard moments in the NICU where you don't want to be there.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for saying that. And I think that it is important to talk about, all the things that I did go through and all the things that I did, but also, those moments that are a little more vulnerable, so that the next person that listens to this that feels like, I don't know if I can stay, is something wrong with me as a mom, that you listen and say, no, it's okay.
Yeah.
It is okay.
Oh gosh, for real. You are doing amazing things, and there's no doubt that there are other parents who are going to hear this and thank God. Oh, it's so nice to hear somebody finally say that, because that's exactly how I felt.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, tell us a little bit about your children's book you have coming out, and then if people can follow you or kind of, keep in touch with you and see what you and your family are up
Hmm.
to. And also just a little update on how your son's doing now.
Yes, yes. So I'll start with that. He's doing really, really great. He's 9 months old now. He's totally healthy, super, super chunky monster. He's in the 90th percentile in weight and height, which is hilarious because my older girls were so small that they were like never even on the charts. Like we'd go to the doctor and they'd say, "Oh, they're in the 1%." And so he's doing really, really great. Um, but a pneumothorax is something that can spontaneously happen again. If it spontaneously happened to you once, it can spontaneously happen to you again. He could go his whole life without ever having another one. And it is never a thing. It's a thing that he never even remembers that happens. Or he could have another one. And so that part is kind of scary. Like right now he's totally healthy, but I think the entire rest of my life that will be looming in my head. But, for now he's healthy, and he's doing good, and we couldn't be happier with his progress at this point. And the book that I'm writing, it actually started with him. So I've written my whole life. I have always loved writing. I write for fun. I do a lot of writing just in my work. I like to journal. I just love writing. And my husband has always been telling me to publish a children's book, and I never felt like I had something real to write about or that someone would actually want to read, because I used to just write for fun and write for myself. But in those moments that I was in the NICU and sitting at his bedside and not able to do anything, I took out my phone in its plastic bag and I started writing in my notes app. And I started writing that he was in the hospital, but in his head, because he was in a coma, I started thinking, what does he think? Like, where is he in his mind? And so I said to myself, you know what? He's not here. He's in the jungle. He's exploring the jungle. He's climbing trees. He's hanging out with animals. And he's just having a blast. And so I started writing these adventures that he was going on, instead of being in the hospital. And so I would take that time sitting by him, writing what adventure he was on today. And then one of the days we got bad news, the day that that the doctor told us that he had pneumonia. And so I wrote that adventure that he was battling a monster, that he's been, going on these fun jungle adventures. He's been exploring, but then all of a sudden there was a giant rhinoceros that he had to battle. And so that I kept writing adventure stories. I kept writing, all of these things that he was maybe doing. And after it was all written, and this was back in maybe October, that I got the courage, I told my husband, I think I have something to publish, and I'm going to publish this. And he goes, yep. He goes, I don't even need to know what it's about. The answer is yes, do it. And I was like, okay, but why don't you read it?
Yeah, that's an awesome husband supporter.
Yes. So, and that's how this little book baby was born with my real baby.
I love that.
Yeah, so it's really fun. It starts off with him being in the hospital, but it is really about fun. It's about bravery. It is about him being scared, but overcoming that. And it's about using his imagination to get through these scary adventures. Some are fun and some are scary. And it takes this situation and turns it into an imaginary adventure and kind of this wild ride, instead of sitting in the hospital and thinking about, how hard this is and how scary this is. It's that you have the power to take your imagination somewhere else and to, be somewhere else in your imagination and turn these scary things into an adventure. And so he had a lot of tubes and wires, and the wires were always kind of getting in the way. Like every time I would, try to, when they finally would let me change his diaper, or when I would try to hold him, all these tubes were in the way. And so in the book, he keeps running into spider webs. And so it's all about empowering yourself to turn your imagination into something else and to be brave through those situations and have the resilience to get through it.
I love that. And so we're going to hold you to it, and we can't wait for it to be published so that I can just see, honestly, mamas reading it to their babies in the NICU, and also reading it to siblings at home. And just, I want to read it to my kids. It sounds amazing.
Yeah, thank you so much. We did kind of generalize it so that it would fit with any child that's in the hospital. It's not specific to NICU babies. It can be for the NICU for that mom that's not able to hold their baby, that they can read this book and have something to do, or the mom that can hold their baby and reads the book to them, or even an older child, a 4 or 5-year-old who has to have a procedure and stay in the hospital, and kind of help them through it that way. And my 3-year-old nephew, he had to have stitches. And so even, that's not a hospital stay, but my sister-in-law, his mom, had said, wow, I wish we had this book then, because he was so scared, and even it would have helped him just realize that he could be brave and he could overcome that situation. So it really can help, the siblings and the children in the hospital, or in an urgent care, in a procedure, in any kind of those situations.
Do you have a title yet?
Yes. So the title is Ari the Brave. So my son's name is Ari, but we call him AJ. His middle name is Jack, so Ari Jack. But the book is Ari the Brave, and you can follow me on Instagram at Krystal Wallach Author. And then we also have, with writing a book, I have established an independent publishing company to publish this through, and that company is called Rainbow Wings Publishing. And so they also have social media pages.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here and being so vulnerable and telling, a lot of those dark times that actually happen and are important to talk about. And, super moms can break too. It's just what happens to all of us.
Right.
It's just what happens.
Exactly. Exactly.
Well, thank you
so much for having me and letting me share my story. I really appreciate everything that you're doing for the community and for us in these scary situations. So thank you so much.
Oh, of course. My hope is that, another mom going through a situation can hear what you have to say and feel less alone during all of it.
Yeah, I hope so.
Thank you so much, Krystal, for being so darn vulnerable and talking about the true feelings of not wanting to go into the NICU. As I said in our conversation, this is so common, and we need to normalize that feeling for parents. The last thing a new mom needs is feeling guilt, like she's not a good mom because she doesn't want to go into the NICU, when the truth is that's her totally normal feeling. So thank you so much for listening. I'll be back next week with another episode, and I hope you guys have a great week. All right, bye. Thank you for listening to the Child Life On Call podcast. I'm your host, Katie Taylor, and you can follow us at Child Life On Call on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Please rate and review to make it easier for other families to find us. We have cute merch available at www.bonfire.com/store/childlifeoncall, and you can listen to more episodes and find resources at childlifepodcast.com.